Our last speaker of this weekend is Menno Cramer, and he has a PhD in both neuroscience and architecture, and he likes to explore the sort of meeting point between neuroscience and design. He also likes to explore how architecture can reduce the stress level in an environment. So he does work in environments that have their own challenges, and he works daily with technology, UX, and many other things that you will probably tell us. And then he's also a creator for technology for Spin, as well as a neuroscience consultant at Arc Shelter.
First of all, I'm a bit vague sometimes, so if you don't follow, that's okay. I want to thank you, everyone, for also accommodating this to be in English. I know I'm not the only foreigner here, but I am one of the reasons. So, tusen tak, thank you. And yes, so before I start, let me put one disclaimer out there. Everything that is not nature has been created by a brain. So this MacBook has been designed by someone. This space has been designed by someone. This speaker has been designed by someone. The bus schedule has been designed by someone. If it's a product, a space, or a service, it comes from someone. And the only way for us to make sense of that is to consume it with your brain. So it's someone's brain fart being absorbed by another brain to make sense of what this is, to have feelings, to understand, to whatever. So we are all victim of this, yet very little people understand how the brain works. Even I don't, like I'm not the expert. So I ask a lot of questions, I don't have a lot of answers, and that's a comfortable space to be in. So I'll first tell a story of design. Then we'll do a little bit of neuroscience, because that's what I'm passionate about. And it's easy, like it's an easy topic to end on, right? I mean, you're all still here, so. Then some math, because if the neuroscience isn't hard enough, we can make it more boring. And then a real world example. I've been preaching this for 10 years, maybe 12, but eventually you need to eat your own dog food, right? So if you have this story of how does neuroscience and design relate, you can't just keep saying it, because people ask a question, okay, but if I paint this space blue instead of black, how does it change the perception of someone on stage? Or like, you need to get answers eventually. So a story of design. We are, the world around us is very square. Flat surfaces are easy, walls are easy, there are a lot of 90-degree corners. But in nature, this doesn't necessarily exist. I'm not saying we should build caves and everything should be spheric and whatever. I'm just saying that we are a biological entity, and we often forget that. And it's not about machine and it's not about tech, but it's a very rooted base where we start. Whereas most spaces, and I studied a lot of medical spaces, they're very ugly. They're very... Luckily, the people that are here are there for another reason, so they don't pay enough attention to the space. But they are very harsh, and they're not healthy. And I think everyone understands ergonomics, like what is the weight of the handle of a knife in order for the hand to fit right. In architecture and in design, and if it's urban design or any design, there should be a neuroergonomics, like what is good for the brain rather than what is good for the body. And then spaces, they are changing with technology as well. They become interactive, they become tactile, and they go from the harshness of reality to playfulness. But you can't say that red and pink is playful. There's no correlation between the designed stimulus and the perceived experience of something. And then it's everywhere. Design is in products, in services, in spaces. And this is, like, we cannot escape it. There's no way you cannot be exposed. And then the last thing here is the technology is changing. If you find this beautiful or ugly, I don't really care. But we're not stuck to the limitations of technology in order to create. With the construction methods, as well as with calculation, we are entering an era where the future building does not have to be square. And that is an opportunity that we need to start rethinking. Why are we stuck to the old-fashioned way of thinking just because it's been this way, because of what we were capable of? This is a cathedral which was designed with the intent to have this sense of awe. So to be amazed, to be silent, to experience something greater, whatever that may be. If it would be the exposure to the Fibonacci sequence of the beams on the ceiling that then would resonate to your wavelength. Now, I'm not very scientific at this stage, but it's a study. It's a try to understand why do large spaces make you go quiet? Why do you feel something when you walk into a place? And it's still very explorative, as in there are no answers. Like AutoCAD and ArchiCAD, they don't have like a plugin where you see the behavioral output, as in this space. If I walk in, my heart rate would go from 76 to 74, and now I'm calmer. Or this space will allow social interaction to happen because we perceive it neurologically as safe. So that changes how we act and interact. And then now you can study even further and really understand what's happening in the brain. Where am I looking? Where am I paying attention? What is hitting me? And with technology, and now I'll stop expanding because otherwise I need to cover all topics, but the innovation speed is going tremendously fast, and we're doing very little research or protection on ourselves of what we're exposing us to. We know that what we're exposed to will impact us, but we don't know how, or we don't know what it will do. I've showed this to some of you before. You can read it yourself. There's a volunteer that is brave. We can try. But the brain doesn't read single things. So the brain, like when I stand here, I see this space. It's one thing. But there's a light, there's a ceiling, there are beams, there are corners, there's whatever. But the brain is not going to analyze all 5,322 features and then do the math and the area under the graph and say, oh, I like this. That's not like, I only consume 100%. If I turn around and I see less, I still consume 100%. But the 100% has changed. And now I'll pull ahead, if she's watching the recording. This is the brain. It's very nice. No, but it's, I will not explain how it works. I really want you to take away that it's like a very dirty, complex chemical thing. Like, it's like when you cut meat or a fish, it's like meaty, well, makes sense. But the brain is the same. Like, it's not this It's not this construct of thoughts and feelings and whatever. No, it's neurons firing, it's cells moving, it's hormones going up and down, it's electricity going, whatever. And then there's this layer, this concept, where all of a sudden, one electricity spark on one side starts meaning something. And that goes from understanding what it is to taking it in. And actually, I think a lot of artists and architects, they bias sight. I think we use our eyes too much, whereas if you look in the brain, the area responding to sound or the area responding to smell is actually a lot stronger, and the connections are stronger and they're deeper, but sight is the only one we can understand. And then the brain talks with the body, right? So when you have a coffee, your heart rate goes up. Like, it's not rocket science. And when you're stressed, you might have sweaty palms, right? And we are human. We are intrinsically human. And the brain talks to the body, and the body talks to the brain. But this link, you can hijack as well. This one you can play with. This is one emotion or one state that we're very familiar with, and it's stress. And the interesting thing about stress is that actually stress is healthy. Without stress, the heart would not understand, it would need to beat. Because stress, from an evolutionary point of view, helps you feed this guy. Maybe not here in Norway, but it helps you run faster in a fight. It helps you fight longer. And stress is healthy, and our society has ruined the beauty of what stress actually is, and it made it a bad thing, because we're constantly exposed for not necessary fights. Emptying your email box is not a fight you should be fighting every day, because it doesn't serve a purpose. So we're exposing ourselves to a lot of endurance without actually benefiting from it, because no one reads those emails anyways. I don't remember what I wanted to say here. But it's, I know, because there's the next slide, yes. I was talking to Trige, and he was like, but how does it work? Like, your brain is different than mine. Your perceptions are different than mine. Your memory is different than mine. But we're all similar to an extent, as in we all have these regions and we all have these things, and they all work the same way. And biologically speaking, we're related to the other species. But you can actually see in the behavior the brain size and which part, what's the base, what's the frontal cortex, what allows me to have feelings or emotions or understand consciousness, because dependent on how far you think, not all species have that. Where's my, here. But what I said is, like, the easiest way to understand is the brain is the combination of a sponge and a field of grass. It's a sponge because it's a network with holes, but it's connected, but it can carry the water, and it just absorbs and absorbs and absorbs. The sponge doesn't know how much water it has. It doesn't understand what it has. It absorbs. It leaks out eventually too. Like, the brain is not an infinite thing that you can just put stuff in. And then the pathways, they get stronger if you use them a lot. And that makes you as a person. So if you follow one neuronal path over and over and over again, it's like the one here in the grass. And that mapping you can do. So if I would look in my brain when I see the concept house, and I would look in Hans Peter's brain when he sees the concept house, I can follow the route. I know the route is not the same because of culture, because of history, because of family, because of whatever reason that we've a different concept of house, but it's the same route through this sponge. And that is a mapping that we all have and that we all understand, and that's why we can communicate as well, because the word home has a meaning, the word house has a meaning. But throughout cultures, that also varies a bit. In some places, home is a much more family-oriented construct, and in some it's a safety-oriented construct. And then it's the same path, but the reason why it exists and how it's there has changed. I will not go into detailed here, but it's like we see stuff, and we only see change. We don't actually see what we think that we see. This speaker has been here the whole day. None of you have been watching to the speaker in the last 20 minutes. Because you just ignore it. Like, it doesn't make sense for your brain to check. Sometimes it checks, oh yeah, that black curtain is still there. Cool, and I can ignore it. So, and I only, when I see you, I have this mental structure of you, and if I would change my head, I still know you're here, so I can move my mental structure without actually having to consume new pixels to make sense of what it is. Because if we would need to analyze every single pixel, every single second, the brain would get very, very tired. And the good thing is that we're all intrinsically lazy, right? The body will find a more efficient way of doing something. Because why not? Okay. And then there's the real hardcore, like, chemical piece to it that we cannot control. I cannot think harder, and my synapse releases more neurotransmitters. Like, I'm a victim to the own state that my brain has developed over time. And yes, you can train that. Yes, a diet is related. Yes, exposure to nature is related. But you cannot just change your feelings, your opinions, your beings, because there is this sponge that has been pushed together and pulled out, and it's this ball, like I said, this dirty ball of molecules, right? And yeah, I think that's enough. But the hard part is, how do you go back to this then, right? So I understand, I have neurons, there's electrical activity, there are chemicals floating around, there are hormones, there are neurotransmitters, which I can hack with medication or with substances or whatever, but how do I go back to being able, as a creator, as a maker, how do I go to being able to accurately predict what the behavioral, psychological, or physical impact or outcome would be? And how can I guarantee that for you it's the same as for you? Because that, as a creator, should be your responsibility. But when I did my PhD, often people came to me and said, oh, but how can I change this bar so it makes more money? Or how can I have a date and then pick the place where the date occurs to have a higher success rate of whatever purpose that date may have had? And it's not that easy, because we cannot yet, maybe ever, fully accurately predict what it does. But what I like about the work that also Lars said, but what Marco said, it's the urban acupuncture. We don't know what it is, what it does, but we know that if I poke here with a needle in a layer of the fabric of society, if that's cultural or social or financial or whatever layer you need or have, I know that I can push and I can do something. This one I've shared before in another group, but this one is interesting, I think, because it's about creativity. So there was a study from Myers and Levy, where they exposed people in this room. This room is similar, as you can see, but there's a different ceiling height. And what they did there was that they got a random group of words that they needed to put in groups that they found logical. And the group that was in the room with the higher ceiling came up with more complex words as the grouping for the words that they were exposed to. So, for example, In the lower ceiling one, you had I don't know, all of these sports have a ball. Okay, like tennis, football, or whatever. In the higher ceiling one, it's all these ball sports are a team sport. Or like they had more complex constructs, as if they had more cognitive capability, purely based upon the spaciousness of the space. And then the interesting part is that the spaciousness of a space is not due to architectural properties alone. So you can, let's go here. You can change the exact same space by changing light alone. Your brain will not see this as the equal box, even though it is the exact same box. So how can you play, and I think we do that a lot with light, with colors, with whatever, and trick the brain in understanding that your mental picture of this space is not a one-to-one match of the physical space. So then we started to play with the concept of spaciousness. And spaciousness was compared, contrasted with tranquility. Tranquility, very fancy word in the sciences, but basically it's not the Zen and the mindfulness and the whatever. That's not what tranquility, scientifically speaking, is. Tranquility is on the opposite end of stress. So the definition of tranquility is the absence of stress. And then what are the architectural features that would contribute to understanding that stress? So what we did, we measured the skin conductance and the spit, the saliva. Saliva has cortisol, and cortisol is directly related with stress. And you can measure that. So we designed different spaces, different rooms, and measured the impact. So they were exposed to sound. The sound are the ayads, which is not very pleasant. It's a standardized list of disgusting sounds. Someone vomiting, car crash, crying children, busy cafe, explosion, gunshot, whatever. And these sounds are standardized in to what extent it will impact you. So there's a list as in, if you hear someone retching, it does something to your body, right? And that you can measure. So what we did is we exposed them to a different space, and then have them exposed to these sounds, and design it in such a way that the people, that we could measure the impact, and then cross-correlate the reduced impact to which architectural features they were exposed to. Just to start proving that there is this direct link, and to start proving as in, I don't know, access to nature, access to a window, being close to a wall, the color intensity, the light intensity, and really understand what are the features, or the perceived features, which is different than the actual features, that have an impact. The last participant was not very happy. We could not use this one, gave an ice cream and sent them home. Now, we're going into the math. Are you still with me? Things are okay? So, the work from Luca, and this is related with the study from the bio-urbanism field. It's been mentioned a few times. What can we learn from nature? What can we learn from how ants build their things? How a leaf grows? Can we change the streets here to mimic the veins in a body? Because nature has a lot more experience in creating things than we do. Even though we are nature, but that's a whole different debate. So this is a plan of a city. And maybe there's a square, there's a piazza, maybe there's a park, maybe there's some water, there's some shops and some people. Then you can start plotting. I don't know if we have a mathematician in the room. Awesome, so I can say whatever. But But for me, this is the concept of urban acupuncture explained in a less fluffy way. So when you have a park, or an intervention, or a sculpture, or a building, or normoria, or something, it is this peak, this spike, which is the acupuncture point, right? And that then lifts the whole area up, or it has an impact. It has an impact there, it has an impact on the block, it has an impact on the finances, it has an impact on social being, it has an impact on everything. And these things are related, and that comes with. And then when you start mapping the city, you have these benefit lines. So there's a hotspot, there's a park, there's a pond, there's a playground, there's a something. But then you have multiple, right? So in the bottom corner, you see the piazza, the park, and the water, and the shops. They will all come back again. And then all of a sudden, the city gets a full layer of exposure. And then this is, I think, where when you design, or when you decide the intervention sites, you should map very carefully so you cover the right places and the right amount of the people that you need to reach, that you can literally lift the whole town up. I'm not sure that's what he meant with this paper, but that's how I'm using it. Then the last part. So this was I worked with Martin and Victor and Michiel from Ark Shelter. And this is a project in Belgium, which is inspired by the Maggie Care Centers. So what it is, it's a place that is closely related to hospitals, and where patients that have cancer are being treated, or the process of after chemo, after how do you say that? When the doctor says what you have? After the moment of establishing, you start this process of healing. And then how can you have a space that is much less clinical and much less medical, much less sterile, that is a support for them to have these brain healthy spaces, is what we're trying to do. And then we started to work, we started to understand, okay, if you go through chemo, your relationship with light changes, your relationship with smell changes, your relationship with everything changes, because the body changes. And that's the direct link. As I said earlier, the body and the brain are directly related, but it also works the other way around. If the body is under attack, the brain will also respond differently. And then with the modular buildings that we do, we started to play around. How can I design for moments to occur? And how can I design that each emotional, mental, physical, physiological need was being addressed? This is now here. It's been open for, I think, almost a year, or maybe not a year yet. And the community in there is coming to life. We focused on access to nature, focused on smells of the communal part of the kitchen. If you cannot eat anything or not keep everything inside, maybe you don't want to sit around when people are having food. Focus on privacy, focus on light, remove the hard edges, and allow people to be in the space which does not feel like I'm visiting a doctor. So also the therapy rooms are directly under the sky with access, and not so clinical. Try to reduce the number of 90-degree corners, or at least the perception thereof. So there are lights under, and then when there's a light strip in the corner, the brain cannot perceive it because it becomes a smooth, because the light falls around. And very light wood, very calming, very quiet. And also make sure that the sound doesn't bounce off, right? So have the right texture, feel, so that you control what's happening in the space. Because with a lot of glass, that's very harsh. Like the sound just bounces off and it becomes not very calming unless you're quiet. Yeah, these are just some pictures when it was just finished. And I think that's what I had to share. So before we go to questions, there's one takeaway slide, in case you don't remember the math formula. That was really easy. We are a biological machine. We should not forget that. We are maybe more than that, but we are at least that. You cannot design a single feature. Forget that. UX design always does that. Give me a banner that converts more. It's like, I don't care. The web page is not the banner, right? It doesn't, like, it's not the whole thing. The comprehension and the understanding are two separate things. Like, the color red is associated with anger and love and emotion, but it's not just that. Like, you cannot make the immediate link. And there's no single pathway to have a perfect response. Until we do, and then I'll come back again and I can present about that, but probably not. So, thank you. Are there any questions? Oh, you already did that, it's okay. In the States, it's in Arkansas. I actually don't know where, it's quite old already. But it was very experimental, or like, I want to create a space that evokes X. I mean, I don't know, maybe the creator of this space had that too, right? So it's, but yeah, it's there still. Anyone else? Don't be scared. I know it's been long days. Thank you for keeping attention. Yes?
Why was it square?
Why was what square?
Why did you choose that?
That's a good question. So I think we are still stuck at the capacity of the creation, also with the budget and with the experimental piece. We weren't allowed to go too far away from what is allowed, with building regulations as well as the medical piece. And I think with the light strips in the corners, you take away the worst part of the square. And with the light at the top, instead of the corner being the ceiling and the wall, the ceiling is kind of floating. So even though, from a drawing perspective, there is a 90-degree corner, for your brain, there's not necessarily this direct hard edge, because the glass, even though it's a corner, I look through it, right? So my mental model of the space is bigger than the actual space.
But how about the outside?
Well, the outside we don't care about. The people live inside. No, but that's a good point. I guess we could have made it a little bit more smooth. But actually, that's a good point. I think the outside was not interesting for us, because you needed the safe space and the ramp to get from the hospital to come here. And then you're protected. You're inside. It's like it's the nest, right? And we did think about having the core in the center, so that the nest is like hugging the core. But yeah, I think that's still a creation restriction rather than a ideation restriction. Yes?
Have you worked with the material? I see you have a lot of wood material. The brain and the material.
So there are a lot of nudges towards that using natural materials is actually really healthy, if that would be or stone or wood or whatever. If that's because of the time we've been exposed to it, or maybe we can unconsciously understand it better. But it's more of a, I don't know how to say it. It's like I started sculpting in stone, and there you remove the trash, right? So the sculpture, when you start, technically is already there. Most other arts, you create something out of nothing, and with sculpting, you remove what is not needed. And I think with the choice of materials, it's a bit the same. Like, you don't need to ruin what nature had created, and you don't need to hide it or cover it up, because it's just the raw material that technically you can walk outside and be exposed to as well. But I think that's more a personal preference than that's my issue. It's like whenever I talk about this, because I claim there is, I need to have the answer for everything, right? That's what I started with. So yes, I truly believe that there's enough scientific evidence to prove that the exposure to natural materials is more healthy than unnatural materials, which is a difficult statement because it's all carbon molecules and parts and atoms, so technically non-nature is nature. But was that an answer, or do I need to dig myself a deeper hole? Okay. All right. Very good. Then, thank you.